If you were to tow a chunk of the Western Sahara 100 kilometers out into the Atlantic, you would have something like Fuerteventura. It's a great place to go for winter sunshine, water sports, and a stark, strangely beautiful volcanic desert landscape. For the birder, it's not renowned for its huge species list, but it does have some interesting special residents, but they need to be sought out. Cream-coloured coursers are here, and of course they frequent sandy-coloured gravel plains, which they match perfectly. This makes them challenging to find, but pleasing when one does find them. At the other extreme, there are Berthelot's pipits. They sit up obligingly on any rock or prominent object to show themselves. They're charming and extremely photogenic. There is a grey shrike that looks like the Algeriensis subspecies, but is in fact Koenigai, a separate Canary Island subspecies. The stone chat that one encounters is certainly a fully fledged species and has its own separate illustration in the Collins Field Guide. One of the advantages of long-time island isolation. This is also a place where it's possible to find the rare and elusive Barbary falcon, if you are very lucky. Sanderlings and turnstones can be ridiculously tame on the beaches. They come to the horseshoe-shaped stone shelters, hand-built over the years by sunbathers, to scavenge on the picnic crumbs from just around one's feet. Wimbrel and grey plovers haunt the many rock pools as the tide recedes. And out to sea, it's sometimes possible to spot Corey's shearwaters looping languidly across the waves. The star of the show, however, on Fuerteventura is the Hubara bustard. This must be one of the most reliable places in the Western Palearctic to track it down. They're declining steeply due to hunting pressure from falconers on the African mainland. Their reduced numbers and the sheer size of their range in the Sahara make them very difficult to find. On my most recent visit to the island, I had, as I normally do when on holiday there, been out into the desert each morning at dawn. I'd had some good sightings. I'd even added a new lifer to my list when a small party of black-bellied sandgrouse flew over on their way to drink. The wind was in from Africa, and I had brought locusts with it from the mainland. I'd been baffled to see gulls stalking across the desert and clearly feeding on something. It wasn't until I walked out onto the look that I found quite large locusts in the low scrub and gravels. This, according to books, is quite an uncommon occurrence and provided a feasting opportunity for the large gulls. I had, of course, looked for the bustards but not seen them on this visit. It's difficult to understand how one can miss such a large bird in a wide, empty expanse of plain, but there are rocks and low stunted bushes and the ground undulates, so there's cover for a bird which has plumage perfectly adapted to hide in this barren landscape. On my penultimate morning, I'd stopped to try and photograph a little group of cream-coloured coursers, but as usual, with little or no success. I noticed in the distance, up the slope, a white plastic bag blowing in the wind. And then it stopped and started moving again, but in the opposite direction, and then it disappeared briefly behind a low bush. By the time I got out of the car, had my scope set up, it had disappeared. I scanned the area and finally spotted a long neck, and then, as it moved out from behind a scrubby bush, could clearly see a bustard. It stood for a moment or two, and then the strangest thing happened. It looked as if the bird was blowing up a huge white balloon. The white area grew and grew until it had totally engulfed, at first its breast, and eventually its whole head. Now it looked like a ball of fluffy white candyfloss on two legs. The bird seemed to have inflated itself. Now, I've seen other bustards in Africa displaying, and I was expecting a rather stately parade as the bird strutted about and showed off its finery. I was not prepared for what it did next. Instead of a swaggering march, it set off on a chaotic, random, lunatic run, weaving from side to side in no particular direction. It careered up and down the slope until unexpectedly it ran straight into a bush. With its head thrown so far back and its breast feathers completely covering its head, it had been to all intents and purposes running blind. It emerged, rumpled and ruffled, and stood sheepishly beside the bush. Its dignity was in tatters, and it looked to me as if it just realised it had made a fool of itself. While it stood there, the passion just drained out of it, and the sumptuous froth of feathers simply collapsed and disappeared, and it sidled away into the scrub, to my mind looking a little bit embarrassed and even a little bit ashamed, its body language suggesting that it wouldn't normally behave like this, but just this once time its emotions had got the better of it, and it felt it had let itself down. It was a magical encounter, and I went back the next morning, but sadly there was no repeat performance. Now I know, of course, that this description is shamelessly anthropomorphic and probably disapproved of in some circles. Of course the bird simply did what these birds do. My interpretation of what I saw is as much about me as it is about what happened. However, any aesthetic appreciation of the beauties and delights of the natural world can only reflect our constructs and our values. So, unabashed, I will continue to enjoy, appreciate and describe birds and all other wildlife, anthropomorphic though it might be sometimes, through the lens of my human values and with the filter of my human passions.